we basically got to a point where I wrote some scripts in a recipe and it just started crashing the server. And it really threw me for a loop because I've never seen that before. And I eventually realized it's because I had a bunch, I had like 30 ad results, and you can technically only have 10. And so I'll go ahead and showcase it here for the video as to what I'm talking about. But let me go ahead and get the music started here. Background music. So we got smooth jams.
Why is everybody still wasting their time trying to learn how to
Oh
sing
my
Pi?
gosh.
Just download Pi and move on. This Chrome extension gives you
So
5 seconds to
uBlock
download
Origin
Pi
got
and
removed
start
from my
learning.
extensions. If any of you have an alternative that I should
It's
get,
that simple. No more interruptions.
I need
Learn
an
how to
ad
make it
blocker.
better. With Pi, you can actually get paid to see ads that you choose to watch. So instead of
Rid of ads. The worst. Okay. Recording. Good. Volume's all great. Okay. So recap for the video. We ended last session with an error with our server not starting up for some reason, and we weren't really sure why. It was because, and I thought it was because something was wrong with my recipe. And I've added a bunch of recipes before, and so it was really confusing as to why the server was just crashing out of the blue. And so what I found is that you can only have 10 results in a recipe. And we're going to investigate in deep into the code as to like maybe why this happens. I'm assuming there's just like a straight seg fault or null pointer or some type of crash that's being emitted, because I've never seen this type of behavior before. But if you realize that your server's crashing, maybe one of the mods you added has 10 recipes or 10 results. Or maybe you just added 10 results. Let's go and showcase this here. I'm going to pack my mod in the Caros, and then I'm going to start the server. Which, remember, we have a start server script which we created, and that's just what we're going to call. I'm just going to put this here so I can quickly start my server. My command line makes it easier just to get things started. And we're going to expect a crash here. Like, I'm expecting a crash. And the reason why I'm doing it this way is to showcase kind of the troubleshooting. Again, to show how to troubleshoot a problem. A lot of times people will come to the scripting channel or come to me and be like, Tree, this is broken. And I'd be like, cool, it's broken. I don't know what that means. Because you've been working on the problem and you guys have, you have all the context in your head and haven't really described the problem to anyone. So in this case, we're going to set up an experiment and my experiment was my recipe is going to crash because I have more than 10 items, and I started it up. You saw it try to start up, and now it's like it's gone from a taskbar. It's just crashed on its own. And actually, I'm gonna, just to be a little more explicit, I'm gonna make sure the console window is open and we can see it getting to the mission and then failing. Mission. You'll also notice that my little cursor goes into a spinny wheel. There we go. And then it crashes. Cool. So we've confirmed that it's crashing, and I want to do a change to see if that fixes the crashing. And so try to do the smallest change so that if it does fix the issue, we know exactly what change fixed it. And so that's what we call learning, right? At least in the scripting world, that's what I call learning for myself. What doesn't work is the best way to know what does work. So I'm going to count these out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, I have 10, and I'm going to delete the rest of these here. We're going to repack, rerun our server. Reading mission. And there we go. Solomon. Oh, man. Okay. Okay, cool. Thank you. There we go. So, for the video's sake, the video caught all of it. But basically, as you can see here, I had a bunch of results that was crashing the server. And then I removed them, making it 10. And now the server's starting. And so I can imagine this has definitely caused new modders issue, and nobody has really ever known how to solve this problem. But fortunately, now that I know this, this is a one of those low-hanging fruit that you ask early on. You know, when somebody says things are broken, like usually I like, it's like, are you packing from your P drive? Have you extracted the game files? Like really simple low-hanging fruit questions that really like suss out if a person has like done something correctly or not. And so again, this is one of those nice ones where it's like, oh, do you have more than 10 items, 10 recipe results in a recipe? They'd be like, yeah. It's like, okay, cool. Then you just remove a few. Alrighty, so just to pick up where we left off last time, we were talking about recipes and how to actually use them, how to build them from scratch, how to understand the properties and ingredients, or properties and like values you can change. And we were going to test it and actually show off the results of our labor. And so since we have some new people in the room today, and for the video's sake, we'll just concisely go over what we talked about last time. And so we have the notion of ingredients in a recipe. You can have 2 ingredients inside of a recipe. Technically, DayZ has mechanisms for more, but they're not actually built out yet. So 2 ingredient recipes. For each, I guess, order or type of recipe in each slot. If you think of 2 ingredients, like 2 buckets of things that can be combined together, we now have a notion of I can have multiple items in bucket 0 or the first bucket, and I can have multiple items that can be combined in the second bucket. And you're kind of seeing that here with rope in the first bucket being a single item, but technically I could have another thing here. Whoops. We can do rope and rag. Rope and rags can be combined with the second ingredient buckets, which is wooden stick and a sharp stick. And you can have, it seems like you can have way more ingredients than results, because some recipes that I've seen have like 15 knives that are added in for skinning. And so we might test the upper bounds of this instant ingredient later, but not right now. Once you have chosen the ingredients you want to use, you then can modify how those ingredients behave once they're combined together. And that's like the ingredient add health. Should we add health when they're combined? Should we set the health to something specific? Should we add quantity? Should we destroy the object? So flipping these bools and changing these values will modify what happens when you combine these 2 items. And you have the same properties for the second bucket as well. And then just as you have modifiers for the ingredients, you have modifiers for the results. And down here, you can set the result to a full quantity. You could set the quantity specifically to something you want. You can set the health specifically to something you want. You can inherit the health from an ingredient. And this number here is the bucket that you want to inherit from. So 0 or 1, the first bucket or the second bucket. The color, we'll get into this one in a little bit. This is a more advanced topic of how you can basically combine 2 items and create a wild number of results. And so we'll go into that in a second. The best use case is armbands. Where should the item be placed when you finish crafting? And should the result replace any ingredient? And so as you can see over here on the right side, the comments, these are in almost all the vanilla recipes. You know, -2 will put the item on the ground, -1 will put it in the inventory, and 0, greater than 0 will switch it with the bucket of ingredient that you want it to. So the first bucket or the second bucket. Moving on, before moving on, most ingredients stop there. It's good enough to just describe the quantity and damage requirements for the ingredients, what you do to the ingredients once the recipe is completed, and then the result, what do you do with the result once it's been created. However, in some cases you might want more advanced logic, like for food, you want to make sure food is baked, boiled, or burnt, or not burnt. And you can't necessarily do that with the vanilla recipe config right here. And so we have the notion of the can do override, which allows us to modify the truthiness or the ability to actually craft this recipe. So when the prompt shows, that's basically a true can do. However, if you wanted to say, I only want my craft to happen if the temperature is, like in this case, greater than 50, you can modify this so that now my rope or rag has to be, 51 degrees C or hotter. Otherwise, this recipe will turn false. And so can do is very powerful. In a lot of my recipes, I've used this for complex checking, like I have a kit that needs specific things attached. And this can do can check that object and check if that kit has the thing and return false if not everything is attached. Canned food mod? Yeah, so if we're talking about canned food, which I can slightly touch on because I've done my own canned food mod, and it actually, we'll touch on that with the color because I abused the color mechanic for that, so I don't have to write a billion recipes. So once you've checked the validity of a recipe, you then have the ability to also modify what happens with the results, the ingredients, and add more things. And so in my case here, we're showcasing that I can take all of the results that we've created and I can do something to them. And in this case, I'm going to disinfect them. And then I'm also going to randomly craft a yellow chem light. And so we might not get this on our first craft, but it's just to showcase that you can modify the existing results that you define, and you can also add new results if you wanted. And so I use this also in my recipes to create new things without using a complex action. And you can kind of see the function to create an object. You give it the class name, you give it a position, and then you give it some flags to tell it how it should behave in the world. 9 times out of 10, if you're spawning an item, you want ECE setup, which is entity central economy or something like that. The setup sets up all the initial values that you want. No lifetime. This basically says the object won't have a lifetime, and you want that in conjunction with dynamic persistency, which basically says it has no lifetime, but dynamic persistency will give the object a lifetime if a player touches it. And so I like using these 3 flags in conjunction because it allows me to spawn vast amounts of items without having to worry about cluttering the server or ruining the central economy nominals, because on the next restart, if a player doesn't touch them, then they'll just be removed. So I often use this in my loot boxes or my loot crates, so that if a player opens something, it doesn't take everything, then it just self-cleans itself up. Very, very helpful. And that's kind of the review of what we talked about last week. And we have the server running, so let's go ahead and run our client as well. Oops. right, we'll start our client. And we'll actually craft this recipe just to showcase that, hey, it works. So a recipe that we created, and then the randomness of the do. And then I saw somebody ask a question about how do I modify existing recipes? And this question was in the Infusion Scripters channel. How do I modify existing recipes without ruining them or messing them up? And we'll touch on that as well. Oh man, it is chilly today. Solomon says, something I don't understand with food recipes is the amount of food, like using a steak 50% versus a steak 90%. What is scripting this still on recipes? So with like a steak, that would be quantity. I just wrapped myself in a blanket. So like human meat steak. Human steak meat, I guess. Class in front of it to reduce the search surface area. All right, yeah, so if we come here, and I'm looking down, quantity. So food itself has a quantity. All right, which means if you wanted to make it the maximum amount of ingredient, and actually, let's do it. Let's go ahead and copy paste this while we can. We're just gonna put two of these together. All right, low yield meat, something like that. And so my minimum damage ingredient, so what's the minimum damage I expect? Well, 0 means pristine. What's the max damage I expect? So it can't be worse than corn, I guess. Put badly damaged. The minimum quantity ingredient that I expect this to have, -1, so it can basically have 0. But the maximum quantity, so like in this case right here, I'm setting it so that my meat can only be 50 quantity large, right? So this will accept 0 to 50 quantity. Let's go back. Let's say I don't want meats that have less than 50 inside of it. You would do this. So now this is 50 and greater. So 50 to max, or to 150, since we know the maximum is 150 for vanilla. And so we'll go ahead and do that, and then we'll say we get a chem light if this works. True, we're not going to mess with the do. Next time we boot up, we'll hit that one. But let's see, what was my recipe again? It was like a rope and a stick, something like that. Yeah, rope or a stick. So if all goes well, I should be able to do I need to, oh goodness, I gotta give myself admin on my test server. Oops, hold on. My profile is this. If anyone has any specific scripting questions, I can also field those if you need. Why is this not working? It's weird. I would be expecting to see a folder in here called DayZ server tests, but it's not here. Where is it? Well, makes it really hard to set my admin tools and stuff. Alright, I can stand by for a second. I might need to dump this mod into something that's actually working so we can just get past it. Just the wonderful world of modding. Things just not working every now and then. Oh, does it need to be in quotes? Okay, that might be a problem. That's so strange. Alright, well. Whatever. That's an easy fix. We'll just dump my mod on the back end of this mod. Can I copy this? I really wish I could right click that and get the file path. Yes, I can. All right, there we go. And we'll just join through the vanilla launcher, like a normal person. I was trying to do these videos all in like DayZ version, but sometimes it just doesn't play nice. How would a non-normal person join? They can't. That's the thing. Like when we were running local servers, like unless somebody's on your home computer network, then they wouldn't be able to join this server that I'm spinning up. It's one reason why you're allowed to do like repacks here, because you're not like uploading anything. We talked about that last week. Quick question. You did RPC only on Invoke Connect before. You said to look into Helicrash. It inputs null and object and identity, so it sends to every client or what? Yes, and so you are essentially seeing... you're seeing the... I guess... one of the usefulnesses of an RPC is that it tells all clients, hey, something exploded, and then the client works out, should I play the sound or not? And that question is, I believe the distance. It's a distance question. One reason why a net sync I shouldn't say problem. I mean, and so the reason why the heli crash needs the RPC is because it needs to be heard beyond a kilometer. So like everyone hears it, whereas normally sounds are net synced, which means they're only synced for the people within the net bubble, which isn't everyone. Why does it say I have? Minus the PBO, which is not part of the server. Oh, I put an A in there. What the heck? Crazy. What is an RPC? RPC is a remote procedure call, right? It's like a harken to the old day. Like the name itself is an old name for like just remotely calling something. So there, we covered this in the first video, which is like what's the difference between an RPC and a net sync? A net sync is something that you do to people that are nearby. An RPC is something that you do to people across the map. And so usually, and also an RPC, it can be client to server and then server to client. However, a net sync is only server to client. So, and the reason why that's important is because, like Genry is running into, is that the server has to maintain the state of the game. It is the source of truth. However, you have 80 clients running around the world that all can diverge from that state. And so these clients need to be able to tell the server things that have changed. Stuff like, I fired a weapon. I've clicked my mouse button. I'm pressing W. That type of stuff. Whereas on the server, once the server knows you've pressed left click to shoot, it then tells all the other players nearby, if it needs to, that that's happened. And so when I'm on opposite sides of the map, I don't really need to know that you've shot or that you've lit a flare. However, if a heli crash happens in the middle of the map or in a corner, I want to let all players know that that's happened by playing a sound. And so those are kind of the two different scenarios they're dealing with. And since sending data over the wire, like sending any information across the internet, incurs a latency cost, not to mention reading that data, unpacking it, changing the state, and then reflecting the state in the game, you want to keep that amount of data as small as possible, because smaller data moves faster and is interpreted faster. And so that's just kind of the two reasons and the two differences between the two, why you would use a net sync versus an RPC. Alrighty, let's get that running. Yeah, daughter, I repack a lot. I mean, if you look at my P drive, I have to fix other people's mods all the time. Like when someone else's mods break before, like experimental is a good example. When I'm preparing my mods for the new experimental branch, things like survivor animations are just automatically broken because the animation graphs are changed. DayZ Horse is another one. Code Lock is another one. And so on my local, I'll have these things fixed, but I won't ever push that data to the workshop because I don't need to. And so very often you can, and there's nothing stopping you from pulling apart a mod on the workshop and examining its guts. I mean, that's encouraged heck. We just don't want you we just don't want you re-uploading. I mean, shoot, I have some of War Dog stuff here, right? His notes in his elevator. Study the crap out of the mods. Like, well, immersive placing is another one. This one's like broken basically, and so, you know, trying to come up with a fix, you need to know how to fix the broken thing. So just don't upload it. Okay, so I need a rag and a stick. Grab a couple of those. Couple of those. Out of reach. And I'm gonna combine these, yeah? I can craft a torch, fireplace, splint. Oh no, where's mine? Did it not work? Need at least 2. Huh. Okay, well, I guess we can debug as to why that's not working. Should have worked. Human. Steak. Go on ground. So that's a pile of full steaks. Here's going to be a pile of like 20 steaks. Steaks with only 20 on it. 2 steaks together. My mod load or something? Alright, what's going on? We'll get to the bottom of this. War Dogs, elevator's broken as a weight limit. Can you up the weight limit and make it your own mod? What you would do is you would override his mod. Just like we do with vanilla. Like, so the one reason why we always start with a retexture is because technically even overriding scripts follows the same behavior, process, methodology, whatever you want to call it, as a retexture. You all are very familiar with making your own config, making your own texture, inheriting from a vanilla item, and then just changing its texture. Like, everyone understands that, right? It's very well documented, and there's no qualms about it. People don't repack DayZ models to make a retexture. Now, it's the same thing with scripts. You don't need to repack the scripts at all. You don't need to redefine everything. You would just mod the class, kind of like in the player base. You would mod War Dog Elevator, and then you would override the weight limit and then return a new weight. So it's like, and that is the same thing as a retexture, in my opinion. You're just overlaying your stuff on top of it. Right, now why are these not? I don't care about the minimum damage. I mean, quantity 0, 0. I feel like that was messing something up. Crunch. We rejoin. And see, the whole reason to use diag mode is so that you could open Workbench, open the scripts in here, dynamic recompile, so you didn't have to close your server down and close your client down. You know, it's taken me, what, 3 to 5 minutes to get this whole thing done, and that would have been like 30-second change. So it really does speed up your development, especially if you have mods. Right, you can't take, like, I couldn't take his code right here, right? If I cannot, I'm expressly prohibited from doing something like this, right? Using publisher and coming here to the mods, right? And then doing this, right? Like, this is what's prohibited. And if you were to copy this folder and put it into your server mod pack and then publish your server mod pack, you have just done what I'm showing here. You're taking the content and uploading it to the workshop. That's a no-no. You're not allowed to do that. You cannot do that. However, you 100% can take a workshop mod and mod the classes on the inside of it and then upload that in your server pack, or upload it as its own mod. I do that all the time. You are extending the functionality. You haven't re-uploaded anything. You've actually created something new on top of something that already existed. And you're only uploading your new thing. So like that's the difference here. Ooh. Okay. I just needed to pack my mod in that one thing here. So you can see our recipe. And in this case, the low meat yield, our requirements say we want 50 meat and above. So we'll go ahead and craft it. Boom. And we got our chem light. That's exactly what I wanted. Now, over here. Oh, these meats are full too. I want to get non-full meats. Spawner. Human meat. Okay, and so now I have ones that are 25. These don't have it. And so now I've essentially enforced a specific amount of meat required to craft a recipe. Or craft a can. Eat it, yum yum. I mean, do we have our cannibal mod on here? Yeah. We took some, we took a human model and ripped it apart and turned it into a cannibal mod so that you can basically flay any part of the human body and reconstruct it together on like a skeleton and stuff. It's pretty funny. And there's a male and female version. Oh, the vicinity view fucked up. Yeah. We try to encourage banditry on our server. Your friendly Trilly said, did you just mention that there's a way to not have to relaunch the server and client when developing? I ended up having to build a PowerShell script in VS Code task, but it would be amazing not to have to do that. Yes, I am effectively talking about... Workbench script debugging. We covered this in the second video, and I went through the steps to set this up, but I'll post the link here in chat. The TLDR here is run through everything except for this advanced configuration down here. This is not needed and will cause confusion, in my opinion. So, yeah, no problem. It's very useful. Once I started using Workbench, it made sense why Add-on Builder is the way it is, because it's their IDE and it does all the linting and syntax checking you want. So, all right, the original recipe. There we go. Okay, so here's the original recipe we're trying to do. The text shown when craft can happen. We're gonna go ahead and craft. Boom, look at all those glow sticks. Glowies, and we even got our yellow one here with the random value. So this kind of is the last final, I guess, validation verification that I need as testing to say that the recipe that we built here works. Actually, both of the recipes we built here work. So we can call this mod done, and we can publish it, ship it. Okay. Particles. 2 particles. Do I have enough time to do particles? Do you want to see me work through an RPC or a NetSync example, or particle example, or like a UI example? I got time for one thing. They're all kind of the same difficulty. RPC example would be awesome. Okay. RPC one is probably the well, they're both pretty easy if you think about it, but all right, my example, we will be building a config, like a JSON config, so I won't touch on what the JSON config is doing, but we'll sort of see how to build it and the mechanism behind it. In this one, which means we will be diving into the wonderful world of 3 game, which can be kind of scary, but it shouldn't be too scary. And unfortunately for me, I've already written out all of this source code inside of Discord. So long time ago, people have asked this question, and we'll just use this. If you go into the scripting channel, right, and then you go up to the top with threads, you'll see JSON config save and load. This has the guts of like the JSON stuff, but we're really just gonna deal with the config, the RPC, excuse me. All right, let me get everything set up. We're gonna make a new folder, 3 game. And then that means we're gonna need to do a new world script module. Remember, if you're adding a new major module, 3 game, 4 world, 5 mission, or 1 core, 2 lib, you gotta define it here, otherwise it won't load. This is another common new script modder error. They'll write some scripts, wonder why their game isn't recognizing them, and they'll come into the modders channel and say hey, I've written this script, I know it works, but it's not running in game. And then we tell them, write some gibberish in the script and see if it compiles. And if it does compile, that means it's not being loaded. And this is usually where you go for that. One of those low-hanging fruit sanity questions. Alrighty. So first off, let's go ahead and... what example should I pull off of? Because I don't want to have to do this again. Oops. Face paints. Cool. It's always easier to go from an example. So I'm just gonna make a simple class, my custom config.c. I'm gonna paste this in here, and I'm just gonna pull out the guts of all this stuff. So, all right. So we're gonna rename this to something like my custom config class yay. Something innocuous that's unique and probably no one will ever pick. Alrighty. I'm gonna blaze over. Non-serialized basically tells the JSON serializer to ignore this value. I do this because I don't want to save this. Right, easy enough. Profile is the profiles folder that you write in your startup script. All right, easy enough. Root config folder. This is the folder where I put all my configs. Since I have several mods with several configs, I have one folder to rule them all. You guys can have a separate folder if you'd like. This is just the name of this folder right here. Literally this folder that's highlighted. And the profile folder is the profile inside of your server. And then eventually the file name, boom, the actual file name is highlighted. I do this because it's easy for me to copy and paste this config class, change some very basic things, and now my config will load exactly how I want to. All right, cool. A function to get my config class. All right. First thing to do, format my folder, the profile, with the root config. Check to see if that file exists. That's what that if is. If it doesn't exist, make it. All right. So far, so good. All right. Now, reload my object or declare my object. Let's find my file path, my actual JSON config. Does that file exist? If it doesn't, then I know I can make a new config, like a new thing that actually holds my JSON data. I can set some default values if I want. And then the most important thing here is the save. All right, this will save the file and create it here so that you can actually read it with Notepad. Something like that. You might ask, how does it know what to write out? Well, the things that aren't non-serialized, so like protected int my awesome int 1, my awesome bool 1, right? And so just a bit of maintenance and scaffolding. I normally protect all of my config classes because I don't want other modders touching them in a way that I don't expect, which means if I put protected on it, I have to give myself getters and setters. Otherwise, I won't be able to access this thing outside of my class. And what good is a config if you can't access the properties outside of the class? This is just administrative overhead and personal opinion, preference, that type of thing. So I'm going to quickly make those. What's the difference between if, and if, else, if? Oh, you're basically talking about conditionals, right? Just like Genry said, if it's just if, it's a single unrelated incident, right? Check this condition. If this condition, if this condition, if this condition, do something. If this condition, do something else. If this condition, do something. If you want to choose between two different options, two or more options, if this thing, else if this thing, else if this thing, else do this. You know, it's a way of saying you have 4 options, pick one. And you can prioritize which option is looked at first. Whereas if you just said, here's 4 options, any one of them you can pick, then that would just be a bunch of multiple if statements. Okay, so int get my awesome int turn m void set my awesome int value, right? And then we want to say m underscore my awesome int equals value, right? Setters and getters, very simple. All I'm doing is setting the value and getting the value. Some of you might be thinking, wow, isn't this a little bit redundant? You already have the value up here. Why not just use that? And one reason why I say it's a personal preference to do it this way is because I generally subscribe to the my function should do one thing and one thing well. This allows me to sort of abstract what I think about at any given time. So if my thing only does one thing and that thing works, then I can kind of ignore it since I know that it works. Kind of lets me think about the actual problem at hand. All right, cool. I got some setters and getters now. And so we're going to go ahead and set some default values. Since I have them, I might as well use them. So I'll set my awesome int to 42, the answer to all things in the universe. And I'll set my bool to false. Okay. And so we save the file. That's what this function is called. All right. Now, kind of jumping a little bit, but if the file doesn't exist, we would create it with default values. But what if it does exist? Well, in this case, we want to load the file from the file in the profile. And so since we have that file name here, we say get it. That, and then we return the object because the whole point of this function is to try and get the config. All right. Now that we have something that actually will give me a config, I am going to set up a way to actually grab this config. Okay. So this class itself is something independent, something I created. And I'll say that this is probably an area that will get a new scripter, give them anxiety. This is what I would call the deep end of the pool, because we've created this and we now need to find a way to like inject it into DayZ. So finding that like trigger or a surface area or the vector to actually add my class into DayZ is the difficult part here. And so to trivialize it, we have access to the DayZ game itself. And this is one reason why I use this function, is because it's defined inside of 3 game, which means it's available in 4 world and 5 mission. And this is important because sometimes I need to be able to call my configs in, I need to be able to call my configs on server-based events, right? And this is important because what's a server-based event that all clients invoke? And the answer to that is the join function. When a player joins the game, okay, they call this on-client ready event gets called, which basically allows me to have the server sort of broker this configuration file to clients. So this is where the RPC comes into play. So this has all been a build up to an RPC in a pretty complex one, so that we can see all the use cases for it. Okay, so let's go ahead and expose our config class to the DayZ game. All right, DayZ gives us an object called DayZ game. It contains a lot of things around game objects, accessing files and things like that. It's a perfect place for putting a configuration. Let's go ahead and make a new file called modded DayZ game. If you're interested in the guts of DayZ game, you know, just go ahead and Control-Shift-F the name, and you can see all the goodies that are here. All right, definitely worth exploring if you want to be an advanced scripter. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and just copy this. Actually, no, I'm going to write it out. Modded DayZ game. Okay. And so for starters, I need an object reference to my configuration that I just created. So we're gonna do protected, because I like to secure my variables. Ref, it's a strong reference because we're creating the object outside of the scope, so we need to hold on to it. This one I will copy and paste. The name of my class, the class that I actually created. My Yes, and then the variable name, which is some name for a variable that I care about. Again, I'm putting an arbitrary name here just to showcase that it doesn't really matter what this thing is named as long as you understand what it means. Okay, so since it's protected, I need a setter and a getter, just like I did with my primitives here. Okay, nice and simple. It sets and it gets it. Okay, we're going to do the same thing for our config. So void set my config class, purposefully creating a weird name. Custom config class name. This is the name of our object we care about. This is some config variable that's being passed in. And then I am going to set the reference of my object up here to the config. Okay. We do this because I only want a single instance of the configuration to be available on the server. The server knows when the server starts. So when the server starts, it creates the config and tells the game this is what its configuration is. Right? So this is how 5 mission talks to 3 game going up the stack. Okay. This is an important mechanism here. And for the people in the video, if you have questions, ask. And for those that are watching and listening, like digest this and ask questions later, because this is a pretty landmark and groundbreaking mechanism once you understand it. Okay, now once we've set the configuration, we need the ability to get the configuration. My getter. Okay, so I could just say something like return something that I care about. But what if this thing is null, which at the very first time it will be. So we quickly check to see if it's not, check to see if it is null. This bang or the exclamation mark in front of a variable represents the not condition. If not object is a quick way of saying if not null. Or if not exists. So basically if this thing doesn't exist, we want to create it. So then since this thing doesn't exist, and config equals, we make a new one. All right, and this is why the ref is important. Okay, because we are creating this value, this object outside of the scope it's been declared. Okay, that's why the ref exists. And we talked about that in video 1, but I'm just highlighting it here so that you can see the mechanism at play. Okay, now I need to set my config. My config is equal to this temporary config option reference dot try get config. That's the name. Try get facepink. Okay, cool. Okay. So now we basically set up a mechanism that allows us to set the config given a file. It allows us to get the config, and it'll create the configuration if it doesn't exist. And so it's basically kind of self-healing and self-actuating. Now the last thing we need to do is actually get this thing hooked up so that when players join the game, well, first off, when the server starts, populate this value, and then when players connect, send them this value. That's the RPC. All right. So we're going to go ahead and add our 5 mission folder, because now we need access to the mission server and mission gameplay, and kind of, you know, when the server starts is when mission server is called. And if you want to know why, this was a fun one to learn in my opinion. If you go into your MP missions and go into like any one of your missions and open the init C. All right, if I just collapse this, you'll notice that the custom mission that's defined in this C code inherits from mission server. And so for the programmers out there, we know that main is the entry point to any like C application. So this void main here feels very familiar. And this custom mission server here, this is the hook into the DayZ game. This is what starts everything. So technically you could write your init C to have rotating missions if you wanted, just like an Arma. So that's totally possible. Nobody's built it yet. I think mostly because they don't understand this mechanism and swapping these things. And I saw somebody earlier, I think Petrol is doing Archon stuff, which you would need to understand like the Archon server to lock people out of the server as you're switching things, but I digress. Anyway, so this is where everything starts, right? You click the start bat, the exe is run, main is hit because the mission is start, and mission server is invoked. You know, new custom mission, which means boom, this construct right here is one of the first things run when your server starts. Which is why I use it to, in this case, set the configuration. Let's go ahead and do that. File, modded, mission server.c, right? We're gonna mod. And actually, before I do that, I'm gonna go ahead and copy Control-Shift-F this. All right, if I go to vanilla, one thing to note is that there's mission server and mission gameplay, and then mission base. Okay. Now these are important because if you have ever done anything with the main menu or the dynamic music player or anything that touches that beginning entrance state as a player, you've probably run into this. Okay. So mission base is the overarching class for a mission. All right. It's what contains the world and all that stuff. Mission server is a mission base for a server. All right. Not too novel, just here's worth mentioning. Mission gameplay is the mission for a client. All right. So it's a very important distinction because mission server has like constant stuff set up and things that the server need to know, and mission gameplay has like the UI and HUD and stuff like that. And so this is a big gotcha for new modders when they're starting off and trying to understand how to mod a main menu and things like that. Mission gameplay is client side. Big difference. All right, let's get back to setting this up. Okay, so void mission server. This is the constructor, the thing that is called when our mission starts. And so when the mission starts, I want to be able to set my config. I want to get it going and get it set up. And so I need a way to call this function, set my config class. Fortunately, there is a convenience function inside of mission base called get DayZ game. All right, and this will return us a DayZ game object, which is one reason why we put our config class in that class. All right. So I'm going to set it by also calling my get function. All right. And that's one reason why I put the null check in here to actually create it. So this is kind of I want an elegant one-liner. I could technically do something like this if I wanted to. Could do something like that. I just didn't. I come from C#, so I like the one-liners. I like the syntactic sugar. But okay, so basically to explain what just happened here is when the mission starts, we get the DayZ game. We're gonna set the config class, and we set it with whatever we get. So essentially, if this is the first time we've started our server, which if a new server owner subscribes to our mod, they won't have our config, so it'll create it for them. That's that first server we start. And then afterwards, it's going to grab it and then populate it when they restart the server. And so this kind of handles all of that for you. Yeah, these will all eventually all be cut up and made more formal. All the raw source is all on YouTube at the moment. Okay, so now the server has the config set up. Cool, now we need to get the config to the clients. All right, we need to tell the clients that, hey, there was something from the server that you need to know about. All right, an easy one is on client ready. This will get invoked anytime a player respawns. So they'll join the server, they die, they respawn, or get recalled. There are other events that happen only once. This is a relic. Me using this specific function is a relic of my tradition, or like because I've done it in the past. I'm currently experimenting with better ways of sending this function or this type of RPC. Let's get into it. We call super because we want to make sure everything happens prior. Okay. Now, we need a few things for an RPC. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that print. We need the parameters. Okay, and this can kind of be confusing to new modders. Is like, what is a param, and how do I send it through? In this case, I'm just gonna say use auto. Let the game figure it out. Don't like fight it. Just use it. Name your variable, and then the param, you pass in the type of object that you care about. And so since I know my type is my custom config class EA, I'm just gonna put that there. And then I need to be able to actually send the config. And so what this line is doing, let's go ahead and break it down a little bit. Automatically assigns the type to the variable. All right, because in programming, every time you make a new variable, you have to define its type, like int test, right? Like the type is int. I could technically do auto test1, and it would do the same thing as int test1. We just know that it's an int. All right. Sometimes these objects can be complicated though. Config params is the variable name of this param1. New allocates memory special keyword. Param1 is a class type. Brackets, the carets denote template can be used. My custom config class EA is the specific template we are using. And this is us getting the config to send to the client. All right. So a lot happened in this one line here. Okay. And it can be confusing because, in my opinion, templating is pretty advanced. But basically, this allows me to pipe through any data masked as a param. Okay, this is a circle hole through a square shape, since technically a circle can fit through a square shape. And then the circle is this thing here, the config that we've created. Okay. So now that we have the payload ready to send over the wire, okay, so this is the thing that's actually being sent across the wire. Let's go ahead and get the RPC set up. All right, and so in this case, we have get game RPC single param, a function that sends a single param as an RPC. All right, if I were to search on this, and go to the proto, you'll see that there are quite a few RPCs in game. There's RPC, there's RPC single param, RPC self, RPC self single param. And these are just different things you need for RPCs. Different signatures. Different ways we can use it. Okay. Actually, I guess I'll keep it up so I can see the signature. So the first parameter is the target. Who what object is the target of RPC? This is not the same as who is it sent to, okay? The target can be anything, right? It can be an object, it can be an item, it can be a player in this case, it can be null. RPC type, the unique ID for any given RPC. RPCs can collide if they share the same value. And so this is one reason why community framework exists, in my opinion, or one of the most important reasons, is because you have an RPC framework that you register to, and then it'll ensure that any mods that are running, ideally if you're using the RPC, community framework RPC, it'll ensure that there's no collisions. I don't think most people use it that way though, unfortunately. So it's kind of hit or miss. If you're having RPC troubles in a modded environment, you probably have a value that's colliding with someone's known value. How do you find a known value? That's difficult. I normally grab an existing RPC and then change numbers randomly and then give it a negative because they're signed integers. All right. The payload. The data we will be sending across the wire. And then there's a bool for guaranteed. Do we guarantee, I can't spell, ensure its transmission? Because the game will drop unnecessary network traffic. It has built-in safeguards. So if you put false in here, you could technically shove off a bazillion RPCs if you want and kind of treat it like UDP, which is essentially unordered traffic that doesn't really guarantee transmission. But if you want it to get there, then you put true. And then lastly is the identity. You know, who is this RPC sent to? If null, sends to everyone on the server. All right, it's all or nothing. You either send it to a specific person or you send it to everyone on the server. There's really nowhere in between. Let's go ahead and just give ourselves a random number for our RPC. We have our config params that we set above. We do want this guaranteed, and we want it to be the identity of the player that's joining. Okay. So now the server has sent off an RPC at this point. We are, one half of the way done. Now, when the client joins, how does the client interpret this and handle the RPC? Well, the answer to that is with its own RPC. Unfortunately for me, I already have player base set up. Okay, we're gonna go and close that. I'm gonna go ahead and copy and paste. So if you went into the player base, since the player base is the one that's joining and the player base is the one that's receiving the RPC, it makes sense that I should probably look inside of the player base to find how vanilla already does RPC handling. Okay, so I've searched through all files. I'm looking for the player base. I'm in player base. I'm going to search for on RPC, and you'll see that there is an existing framework here for it. Perfect. As a programmer, I love copy and pasting. I'm going to copy this first little part. Okay. The bare minimum you need when overriding, the function overriding, and then the super call. Okay. So now I can say something like, if the RPC type is equal to the RPC that I created here, right? And this number was just something random that I picked up. But if you're making an actual RPC, you want to make sure that it's unique. Okay, so if that RPC type is that, then I know inside this if statement, the client has received the server's RPC. All right, so like when somebody asks, how do I do an RPC? At this point, the client has it. So how do I read it? Great, now we get to talk about serial, excuse me. We get to talk about serial data reading, all right? So within the RPC, we have this notion or parameter, variable, whatever you want to call it, called the context. Its type is params read context. That's just a fancy name for the payload, all right? If we can think of it like we write the data in order on this side, we have to read the data in order on this side. And that context is what essentially maintains that order. This is a DayZ specific thing. Okay? So, since I know that, I'm actually going to copy this and paste it on my side just to make it a little easier. So I know that this is what I piped through my payload on the server. So I'm going to copy this param, right? I'm declaring it so that it's like footprint in memory is present. It just doesn't have any values. I know that it's going to be this shape though. And then I'm going to say if the context does not read this shape, then return. This is basically what happens when your server is starting up and it's loading the database and it can't load something from the database and it just crashes out and stops running. This is essentially what we're doing here. Since the order of what we're expecting does not match, we're going to essentially fail miserably and tell the game that it should fail. This is just a design decision. You could technically fail gracefully and say like maybe like print something and then let it keep going. It's generally good practice that if when you send data across the wire you don't receive it the same way you sent it, that it's been tampered with. That's one reason why they kind of just null out short circuit from these things. It's a security thing. Okay, so if we get past this if condition, we know that this variable is now the payload. That's what read does. It actually reads the wire, reads the data off of the wire, and it puts it into this variable. So if we pass this if condition, we know that this variable has the data that we want. Cool. Since I know that this variable has the data that I want, I'm going to set my client copy of this data. Okay. So just like we set the data here when the server started, the client also needs to set its data. So I copy that line just to showcase that it's the same. Okay. And so at this point, the server started, our config was created, and then our client joined, and the client was sent the config. And now it's set up, and now my client can do things like get the config, get a value on the config. If I wanted to change a value on that config, I would then need to make an action that sends an RPC to the server with that new changed value. The server would update its config, and then you would need to also make a mechanism to send that changed config back to the client. But this right here is essentially the base mechanism you need to do an RPC from server to client. So that's kind of the TLDR on RPCs. Let's see if this works. Should I copy and pasted most of these things? Let's see if I made a syntax error. No, we're good. Now, the benefit of doing what I just did, so like, if you were to put, let's say you wanted to put this set config inside of mission gameplay, what would happen is on my local, in my DayZ folder, I would get a folder of its tree mods, and it would save it just like you see here. And so this is a way to get around that and only send the configuration to the client so it's not saved on there. Like VPP admin tools, there's really no reason there should be these things here. Like, it doesn't make sense. These are server configs that don't need to be stored on my client. And it's actually a waste of my computer space. Granted, it's small, but just it's one of those design decisions that kind of highlights just not thinking through the process the whole way. And this is not me dogging on VP admin tools. I don't know even this stuff might actually be required on the client side. Just kind of showcasing that if you have a data config, you probably shouldn't be saving on the client side. And this is the one way to do that. Okay, cool. So in this case, started my server. I didn't delete my yeah, since it already exists there. Okay. Any other questions before I kind of close it out? I think I gotta get a little early today, but all right, let's hear it. Rapid fire mode. Yeah, no problem. Anything to help elevate the scripting acumen of the community. And the better we all are, the better the mods are. My YouTube is this. How do you cancel a void? Oh, yeah, so yeah, so if you just wanted to like get out of a void, like in here, you would just do return. Straight up return. You would add it wherever you wanted it to return. I tend not to return out of voids. So you're touching on a on one of those what I would call a philosophical debates in programming, which is, should you have multiple returns of a function? Something like something like bool can do. Should you have something like this? Oops. Like, should you do this or should you do this? There's no right or wrong answer here. Well, there's no difference between these two. When you think about the human aspect of programming, the difference here is your mental overhead. So when you're looking at this function, trying to understand what it does 6 months to a year after you've built it, you have to ask yourself, and it's broken. That's another thing. This thing is broken. You have to ask yourself, how do you figure out if it's broken? And when you have, from my and this is my opinion here, when you have multiple returns, it's difficult to understand the flow of code because you don't know where the code is flowing to. If you are, any older programmers would harken this back to like the go-to era, you know, where you would just have a go-to in the line. It would tell you to go literally to another line. And for small things, it's okay. But for complex projects that have, you know, 2 or 3 multiple parts, it's, you want to, again, you want to keep the surface area or the amount of things you have to think about as small as possible to actually solve the problem. Because there's a lot of fluff information that just doesn't even need to be considered to solve a problem. And so I personally like this way, the top way, because I know that as my function is entered, it will return a single thing. And so the question is, well, which one of these conditions is broken inside of this one function? Whereas if it was this way, we would say, where else could it be broken? Because I returned 3 different areas, I have to pin down if it's broken downstream as well. And so this kind of gets down into my function should do one thing and one thing well, which also means that my function should be small. It shouldn't be big behemoths doing many, many things, which is why when you see me doing things like, I always break out my getters and setters. Even my try get is very small. I mean, if I took out comments, this would be less than 12 lines. And this essentially just gets a config file. So let's see if can I, like, again, over here, like, how small can I make my code to do what I want? That's the mindset we should, like, in my opinion, is what makes a good programmer, because you're really understanding the flow of your code, the architecture, like how you're building it and stuff like that. Where did I? Oh. What's right here? Okay. Let's see. Do I do any just straight up? I wonder if I just do any straight up returns. I tend not to return out of voids. Usually, if you have a void, it's meant to just do stuff. Oh, yeah. Like, so here's a good example. Returning out of a void is usually a catastrophic ass saver. Like in this case, I return void out of the consume when we're applying, because if there's no player, I literally will generate a ton of null pointers. And so, like, just don't even do it. Technically, you know, a better methodology would be to assert player dot is not null, you know, something like that. This would be far more declarative in your intent than checking if the player isn't there and returning. So even in this case, This is some of my old code, so I don't hold it against myself. Yeah, share some code. Still have some time. Okay, let's you need to put in a code block otherwise. Code block is the tilde, or you just do dot tick 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 tick. And then put C# in front of after this. Oof. So when I see this, it looks like you've just copy and pasted someone else's file instead of done what I normally do here, which is start from a fresh one, type modded, and then the class, right? So in this case, I would expect something like modded class DayZ player implement, and then you having a few things in here, which is like override void function 1. Like, just for the video's sake, what I'm talking about, like all this, like this right here, like there's no way you wrote diag developer. Like that's expansion. So like you don't need that. You're not overwriting that at all. You're probably not touching that. Probably not touching any of these. No need to redefine any of that. Just need to add your own. Just paste the override part, this one. You hit by. See, this is what I would expect to be here. I would only expect this. Boom. So now at this point, I've overridden the DayZ player implement. No, you're fine. But this is the kind of a pitfall of the new modder, which is the copy paste method. Do you see how much text is in there that your eyes have to crawl over? It makes it very difficult to think about what you need to do to actually solve the problem. And so whereas when we do it this way, and I usually have like, you know, the source on the right side over here because VS Code puts it on both sides. So I can have the clutter on the right, but I can have an organized one on the left. And then I usually write things out like comments, you know, if I do super, let's just say do vanilla. Okay. Get rid of all the declarations. Oops. Okay. Then I want to say like check if damage. No, check if a source is a specific type. If type is the thing I care about, do this. So at this point, it becomes very easy. It's like, okay, I need to be like, if source equals something, which now I need to do something. So in your case, it sounds like you're trying to stop something from happening. So this vanilla stuff might be, you might not want to do this at the beginning, right? You might want to check if your thing is something first, then do a vanilla. But maybe your do something is just to return. Because in this case, if the type is the thing I care about, you know, short circuit. This, like, returning, when I say short circuit, that's what I mean by this return. Because when you think of like classical computing originally was like electrical engineering and like circuit diagrams and stuff and vacuum tubes, and so a lot of the nomenclature that I use comes from that. And so when I say short circuit, I'm basically meaning return early out of this thing. So the way I can read this now is when I get hit by anything, check the source. If my condition is true, then just literally return out of this function. This person won't be hit by anything at this point. But if it's not the source I care about, then continue doing whatever you were going to do. So this is another use case of like why calling super at the beginning or calling super before or after your code can have either consequences or results that you want. And ultimately, this is great because we've overridden a very complex set of code that expansion maintains. But again, the code that we touch is so small. Like when I think about maintaining this code over several patches, like I'm pretty sure that this function is never going to change. Like they're not going to overhaul the way things get hit by anytime soon. At least this is a gamble on my part. And DayZ player implement also is a very deep down engine class that's not, it gets updated, but it's really a holder class for a lot of other things. Calling super ensures that your mod doesn't break any other mod, so you're good there. And as long as your condition is, you know, good, this is like a forever mod. You'll never have to change it. Whereas if we were to, let's say, bring all of this stuff over, like if we were to release the mod as is like this, there's a lot of things in here that can break. So it's another one of those that'll up level and also probably accelerate your mod development, because honestly, when files get really big, it's hard to think about them. It really is. It's one reason why I break my files out as much as possible. Yeah, no problem. If there aren't any other questions, we can go ahead and call it, and I'll upload this video. This was a good one. We got through some important things. Recipes, we did RPCs, talked about repacking and copyright. Articles are fun. Maybe I'll have Genri as a special guest talk about particles. The main menu one is good. Please no. Preventing expansion AI to shoot friendly. I should be fine now. Oh yeah, cool. Yeah, you have the source. The source would be the shooter. Or the gun, which is held by the shooter. Either way. Nice. We'll see what Julie says and then we'll close it. Is there anything that you all want to see or want me to prepare for next week? That's something I forgot to ask these last times. I can definitely prepare something and have a little more The one reason why I haven't gone too complex with these examples is because it's really hard to stay on time because we can spiral in so many directions. But if I prepare something, I can get, if we want something complex or a complex topic, I can prepare and have something ready. The CE lifecycle events are somewhat confusing. For example, I wouldn't expect EE delete to be called when a player logs out. Oh, well, so this actually goes back to something we described in the first session, which is everything technically in the game is an object, even the player. And actually the player is a proxy of several objects because the player model is too complex for a single P3D. It's actually something I can showcase. Let me show you that. They exposed the body kit to modders, and so we have what, you know, DayZ looks like. So if I were to look at the male, it's a bunch of oh, sorry, no, it is a single P3. My bad. It's just broken into chunks. Things like that. So technically this is an object that inherits, or excuse me, player base inherits from man base, which inherits from, actually let's go down the inheritance chain. Class player base. Class player base extends man base. Class man base extends DayZ player implement, which extends DayZ player, which extends human, which extends man. Woof. Which extends entity AI. Look at that. So players are actually entity AIs, which then an entity AI is actually a entity, and then an entity is actually a object typed, and an object typed is an object, and an object is an identity. Now, like, so object is as far as I normally go, but identity, now that's really deep. An identity is managed, and managed is the base. Everything in DayZ is basically managed. This is how they hook into the engine and get things moddable. Yes. It'd be great for you to do, Genry, a quick, if we can do it in 30 minutes to an hour, an expose on the damage system like you've laid out in your screenshots. I think that's something that's really missing out in videos. Discord updates, DayZ related server going to Discord, maybe kill feed, number of territories, literally info. Okay. All right, cool. Thank you all for hanging out. I'll see you next week. I'll make sure to get a look into the HTTP API and talk about that, because that's really all you need to hook into Discord. Okay, good. Well, never mind then. Cool. Well, I'll see you guys next week. Thank you all for hanging out and participating in the scripting event. Next week, we will talk about particles, main menu, and the HTTP API. Until then, have fun. Have a great day. Bye.